It is Wednesday, my dudes, and you know what that means? It is time once again to stumble down the bottomless pit of oblivion that is My Planet Coaster playthrough, in which we are building the theme park Velocity Lake. And in this episode, we are back to this roller coaster here. The coaster layout is pretty much done. There's a few kinks that need ironing out, for example, that final bend towards the end, and there's a few sort of wobbly bits of track that could probably be straightened out a bit, but for the most part, the layout is done. Now it needs all the other things doing. So at the moment, it is currently levitating against the will of gravity. We need to sort that out and build some supports for it. I'm going to use a combination of the in-game supports and custom supports. We're also going to build the station building in this episode, as well as begin work on the surrounding area. Although over the next few episodes, we're going to be doing a lot more work on the buildings that surround this coaster. So the reason why I was kind of forced to do custom supports for this ride is because, I don't know if you guys remember, all that time ago, 2 weeks ago, when we first started building this ride, I said that this is not a standard, basically I haven't built this roller coaster as it was intended in the game. The normal version of this roller coaster is the one with the giant swinging duck car that's really, really wide. If you can look at you can see the gantry on the sides of the lift hill just there. That's the actual width of the car that's meant to be on this ride. So as a consequence, whenever the track gets too banked, you get these enormous supports that are there to basically provide enough space between the track and the width of the car that's meant to go on the track. But obviously we don't need that much space because we've got standard floorless cars on this coaster. So whenever the supports are just direct, just vertical poles directly underneath the track, we can use the default kind, because I think the default supports in Planet Coaster look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how they look. You can see there on this big banked corner, for example, the ones where there's any banking at all, the supports have got these massive arms. They look a bit dumb, so we can do our own custom ones for those situations. So that's the intro to this video. One thing I won't do with the track over these next few videos, I do it a little bit later on. That little corner just there, not the one I'm smoothing now, but the one just before it. I've mentioned this before as well. The lateral G-forces of that corner are way too high. I think they're like 3 or even 4 G. I think they're about 3.5 G, to be honest, which is a bit too high. I know a lot of people think that 5 or 6 G is the most for a roller coaster to really exert, but that's vertical G-force, specifically the positive G-forces. This is lateral G-force, and in the real world, roller coasters very rarely exceed 2.5 lateral G. 2.5 is basically the upper limit. Lateral G is basically the act of you sliding back and left and right in your seat, which is obviously very uncomfortable. It's nice to be kind of subjected to positive G-force because it presses you right down into your seat or throws you directly out of the seat against the supports. It's not so fun being thrown side to side. So that's why lateral G-forces tend to be kept to a minimum whenever possible. That's why roller coaster track is banked. There we go. Little education there. So yeah, that's the only part of this coaster where the lateral G-force is a bit too high. All the rest is pretty good. Even this final corner here, which isn't that heavily banked, but then again, the speed at that point is not very high. Here's the new corner, so you guys can see it in real time. There it is. So I hope you'll agree that it's a much better finishing element than what we had before, and we've got a nice short little brake run before the train re-enters the station. Did I mention that we're going to be building the station building this episode? That's basically the focus of today's episode. I mentioned before that we're going for a very industrial theme for this coaster. It was somewhat challenging to build the queue line here because the track layout is so compact and claustrophobic, and I wanted, like I said in previous episodes, I wanted to maximize the amount of pathway interaction for track layouts, so you get lots of really good off-ride photo opportunities and just beauty spots as well as on-ride. So I wanted to have the path get as close to the track as possible, which meant it was even harder to try and build a station building and queue line within this whole mess of path and roller coaster track. So it's kind of a twisty queue line just there, but in the end we do get a pretty nice looking layout, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm very happy with the way the station building turns out here. Oh, you can see me actually doing some minor corrections to the track just here. I wasn't quite happy with how that the ascent on this loop just here, it was a bit sort of twisted, so I reshaped it. Obviously it looked a bit jagged at first. We can do a bit of 4 meter smoothing technique to get it nice and smoothed out again, as that might imply. I'm not going to show all the smoothing because we do a fair amount of minor adjustments along the track and then lots of smoothing over and over that is probably not that interesting to watch, and it's so minor that you probably wouldn't even know it was changed. So I'll tell you what, we'll just leave it there. We'll do a nice little crossfade to another part of the video. In fact, whilst we're fading across, I recently changed my render settings. I've always had smart resample on in Sony Vegas, and I think it always looked a bit bad, right? Because it made the footage a little bit more artificially blurry, which can be a good thing in certain contexts. But I think for time-lapse footage like this, where the footage is played back very, very fast, the camera angle and the things on screen are changing very, very quickly, frame on frame, smart resample or any resample at all is probably not the best thing. So I've actually disabled all resample, and will probably keep it that way for all my other videos. The one exception for Planet Coaster is for the actual POVs themselves. I find they look a little bit better with resample on, at least smart resample on. I think that's just because it creates the effect of motion blur, which Planet Coaster's frame rate is not that consistent. So having the smart resample on, it kind of creates the motion blur that makes it look a little bit more consistent. And in real life, it sort of simulates more speed, in my opinion. So that's why, that's how I'm doing my videos from now on. So I hope the footage looked like the actual construction time-lapse footage looks better. I did it for my latest Kerbal video this week as well, which was the artificial gravity ring station in low Kerb in orbit. And I think the time-lapse footage of the construction was much more easy to assimilate and understand with the resample disabled. So I hope you guys agree. If you don't, I am sorry. So when I was building this station, the Ghostbusters Dlc Pack had just released, and at first I was like, really? Ghostbusters? Why do we need that DLC pack? But it actually turns out to be one of the best additions to this game, because it's not just stuff themed to the movie, like the Back to the Future, Knight Rider, and Monsters DLC packs, but it actually adds a lot of city features, like New York building blocks. We've got new city like wall pieces, brick pieces that you can be placing there, lots of nice wall accents, and lots of big glass window pieces as well. A lot of the window pieces in the building tab are just opaque pieces of like scenery that just make it look like there's a window, but these are actually functional windows and that you can look through them and see what's on the other side, which is a really, really cool addition. And I'm going to be making heavy use of those windows for the upper part of this station. The bottom part, as you can see, it's quite a big building. The bottom part is just going to be left as a big empty shell, aside from the bit that contains the queue line, which isn't very much, admittedly, but there is a bit of it nonetheless that contains the queue. That will obviously be fleshed out, but the rest of the building will just be empty, and it will just be a pretend, I don't know, office, or I could probably turn it into a staff building, to be honest. That might be a good use of it. Haven't done that yet. It's just occurred to me now that might be a good idea. I went with this green color. I was looking at kind of inspiration on Google Images, and there was I did Google it before I started this commentary, and I couldn't find it, but there's like this mobile game. It's one of those like top-down isometric building games. I think it's like a Red Alert clone or something like that, and there was a and it was looking at the sprites for things like that. Think of Factorio, you know, the buildings look in Factorio, kind of isometric, retro-y looking, things like that. And there was one game that had a factory building that had this nice green color scheme, and it looked the actual like shape of the building was very similar to the one I'm building here as well. I really like that. So that's kind of what I based this station building on. It's not really a replica or a clone, it's just inspired by it, which is why I don't feel too guilty not being able to supply a source image. But just in case you guys might play that game and recognize this building as being similar to that, then I did base this on a mobile games building, but I just could not for the life of me remember what that game was, and I couldn't find, my Google foo was not good enough to find that image again. Yeah, I think green color scheme, kind of a bold choice, clashes well with the yellow, but I think it paid off. I think, you know, bright colors can be a risky thing to build, especially if you're going for a semi-realistic looking building. Granted, it's going to look slightly cartoonish because it's Planet Coaster for one thing, which looks cartoony anyway, and also it's a theme park. Theme park buildings tend to look a little bit hyper-realistic, as in like not that realistic. It's hard to describe. You know, like Disney's Main Street looks realistic, but you can tell it's at a theme park scale, because it uses things like, I don't know, force perspective, stuff like that. Where was I going with this? Yeah, so it looks like it could be real, but it looks a little bit too garish and cartoonish to probably exist in the real world, at least as clean as this. You know, if it did exist in the real world, it would probably be quite sooty and run down at this point, because they don't build buildings like this anymore, so it would be a Victorian factory. But it was basically a Victorian factory house. Goodness me, what a rambly description of what I'm doing that was. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. Hopefully the footage was a good supplement to my commentary. There, so as you can see, I'm just building one side and then one, because it's a very detailed building. So we'll just build one side of it and then we can just duplicate the whole thing for the other side to save us doing all of this building process again. And I was just looking at ways we could accent the sides, because it looks a bit weird just having that plain brick without some kind of accent. So I was playing around with various different things. I tried the temple pieces, but I wasn't quite happy. I tried a couple of the temple pieces, actually. I think I did cut out a lot of the samples, but I think some of it has still ended up in the footage, just to show you some of the process I go through when choosing how to build buildings. I wing a lot of it. A lot of it is just improvised as I go along. Maybe I was going to say, and then I eventually went with this. But I guess I've moved on. In fact, did I even do anything for that edge? Maybe I just left it as plain green brick and now I look like an idiot. Well, I mean, I always look like an idiot, but I look even more of an idiot than I normally do in these commentaries. But there we are. One thing about this video, actually, that I kind of regret is that there's no POV at the end of it. Don't worry, in the next 2 episodes, which are going to be dedicated to this coaster and its surrounding areas, there's going to be POVs to kind of show you how the area is developing and progressing from the perspective of the ride itself. But for this episode, I didn't ride the ride at any point during the construction of everything that... like by the time I'd finished everything here, like the next time I rode the ride, there's a lot more constructed, and I didn't want to spoil you guys with things to come in the next episode, so unfortunately no POV. But if you do want to just refresh yourself with what this ride looks like, I'm now saying this 11.5 minutes into the commentary, then you can check out episode 21, I think it was, where we actually built the track itself and rode it. You can see the POV there. And then next Wednesday, my dudes, we'll ride the POV with all the next stuff built, which I think is things like the transfer track and maintenance shed, stuff like that. But the maintenance shed, again, quite heavily themed, much like the station building itself. It's not just a canopy with a separate track inside it, like most of my maintenance sheds are. It's a little bit more heavily themed. Like I said, this is one of the most heavily themed rides I've ever built, and it's certainly one of the most heavily themed in this park. I don't know if it's the most heavily themed is probably the Rapids ride still, isn't it? But the sci-fi ride's pretty heavily themed as well. But in terms of actually having a theme, this is pretty good. And I think I'm pretty happy with how that warehouse came out. It could even be like when Lowne Aerospace purchased the land for this park to build the theme park, these buildings might have already been here and they just decided to retrofit them to be station buildings. Who knows? Now, I mentioned in episode, I think it was 21, so I'm going to go with it now, that this was kind of based on the Lech coaster, or Lech coaster, I don't know how it's pronounced, in Poland. And one thing that coaster does that I really, really liked, it's that it's got a really tall station building, and this loop comes over the station building, and it actually goes inside the station building. I think it's still separated, so when you're queuing for the ride, you can't look and see the track above you. I could be wrong there. But it still goes through a kind of opening in the same building nonetheless. And I wanted to do that here, but I wanted to keep the industrial theme. So I'm going with like a mine shaft sort of thing here. So I'm building this big steel tower and having a very sort of tight hole here. I paused the train at a point where it was passing through the bit I was building around to make sure that there was definitely no way that guests could stick out their arms, legs, whatever, and hit the scenery. That's one thing I wanted to avoid. So I was making sure that we had kind of the head choppers, but not literal ones. And I think it's pretty good. And then we can just try and make it as built up as we can to make it look as realistic as possible, because these things have to be fairly substantial in their construction. And then I built a mine shaft thing at the top. So elevators in mines, they tend to have these big towers at the top with the winches and ropes and chains and all that to pull the elevators up and down from the surface to the bottom of the mine shaft. This is what this is meant to represent. This wouldn't have been part of the original building because it's not a mining building, obviously, so it would look a bit weird. But I think it fits the industrial theme of this ride, and it's good enough. And it adds a nice little accent to the building as well, breaks up that rather monotonous flat roof. And we'll be adding some chimneys later on as well to further kind of improve the aesthetics of this building. And then we'll add some cables. It would have been really nice if Planet Coaster had some cable pieces that didn't have those notches along them. But I guess you can't wish for everything, I guess. That's what Theme Maker's Toolkit is for. But there's something about just looking at stock Planet Coaster that I really appreciate that Filmmaker's Toolkit somewhat detracted from. One of the things I really like about looking at other people's Planet Coaster creations is seeing like how far you can push the stock game and seeing like, wow, I would never have even thought to use that kind of piece for that sort of use. And it's really interesting seeing how people have used pieces to create these amazing structures. Like Silverette is a great example of someone that uses, I think he, I don't want to say pioneered, but he kind of really pushes the use of things like chimneys for things like bollards and fence posts, stuff like that, by just flipping the chimneys upside down. Just little things like that you wouldn't even think of, but they were just picked up by people that play the game a lot more than you, and so are far more familiar with all the pieces. There's the building. That's the end of that little tangent. What can we talk about now? I'm not sure if I do the interior for the queue line here. I might do it at the end of this episode, or we might do it very early on in the next episode. What I'm doing here is just extending the station platform a little bit. I'm using those ladder pieces to create a nice fence. Makes it a little bit more interesting than the standard fences of this game, of which I only use one or two of the fences, because a lot of the fences in Planet Coaster are very heavily themed. There's a couple of iron fences that are fairly generic. I guess it would have been nice to have more generic fences, but then again, generic fences you can just build yourself using the iron pieces and then flank them with concrete pillars, that sort of thing, or use the poles. So I guess we're good. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to think of things to talk about. I end up just looking at the screen and trying to think of things to talk about based on what's on screen, but usually there's not much going on, so I end up just sort of talking about nothing and waiting for something interesting to happen, which still hasn't happened. So I guess I'll try and think of something else to talk about in real life. I was thinking about buying a tablet PC. That's something I was thinking about doing recently. The obvious choice would be the iPad Pro, because I don't mind spending a bit more money on getting something good, but I just don't want an Apple device. I finally replaced my iPod Classic in 2017 after the battery just became too bad. And it was one of the best things ever because I was no longer tied to iTunes. Now I can plug it into a computer and copy and paste songs onto my MP3 player. And I don't know if I could go back to having to synchronize it to iTunes every single time I wanted to put a file on it. Can an iPad just be plugged into a USB port on a Windows PC and just have files dragged and dropped onto them? Because you couldn't do that with the iPod or iPhone. At least not when I use those devices. And so I'm just sometimes when I'm going on a plane, I'll just download a film or something. And I just want to just drag and drop it. I don't have to add it to my iTunes library and then synchronize the iPad and blah, 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 blah. And it would be nice as well to be able to have some sort of external storage as well. So maybe not an iPad. I don't know. Maybe I'll get an iPad Pro. Who knows? But I've always heard that Android tablets are just not very good. I had a Nexus 7, the 2012 Nexus 7, and it was amazing at first. And then it just became so unusably slow. You would tap an app and it would take literally a minute to load the app, and most times it would just crash and turn itself off. I don't know how or why this happened. I know apparently it's something to do with the actual architecture inside the original Nexus 7 that makes it like that. But ever since then, I'm just I just don't really want to risk getting another Android tablet in case it turns out the same way. So then it leaves me what should I get? Maybe I should get a Samsung Galaxy Tab, but I don't know. It's a difficult decision, guys. If you guys know, or is there a Pixel? Do Pixel things still exist? I know the Pixel C was a thing a while ago, but I think it's... I actually haven't done any research. It just popped into my head the other day because I think I was watching a guy called Jamie Pine. You guys may know him, possibly. And he was going through his streaming setup, and he was saying that he had an iPad, but he also has a Mac and stuff and an iPhone. So he's into the Apple ecosystem. And I think when you've got everything Apple, they're good. When you've only got when you got everything Windows and Android and just one Apple device, it's a bit of a pain. Regardless, he was saying that the iPad Pro has helped up his productivity immensely, and it's really useful for streaming. I did debate getting a third monitor for my PC just to have a chat window or something, because when you've only got two screens and one of them is dedicated to the game, it's quite hard to squish everything you need on the other monitor. So you got to have your chat box, your Discord, the streaming software itself. It's quite difficult to manage everything. So it'd be nice to have a third screen to do it. But I thought maybe I could get an iPad or another tablet PC and have all my chat stuff in there. I don't know, just an idea. Or get my emails open or my Patreon open or something like that, just to quickly do things whilst I'm streaming. Or if I wanted to send a Twitter notification out or something, I could quickly do it on the iPad. Granted, I've now got a Stream Deck, so I can kind of send Twitter stuff out with just the press of a button on that. But there's going to be times when I might need to have a little bit more control over it, and so a tablet might be useful. So it's something I've been debating, but I don't really know how much I'd use it, and I have a laptop right now, and it's quite a good laptop. But the thing is, its battery will just drain even when it's off. the battery will just drain. And if I don't use it for like 2 weeks, the battery will just be completely flat. And so it's annoying because then I've got to plug it into a wall, and there aren't many easily accessible plugs in my office. So it's not great. It's great for traveling. That's why I got it. But it's not great for just using on and off when I'm streaming, because I have to make sure it's fully charged the day before, and most of my streams are not planned. I just sort of do them. I think a tablet might be really good, but I don't know how well tablets will hold their charge when not in use. I might just leave it permanently plugged in, but is that a good thing? Can you do that with phones? I know lithium-ion batteries are pretty smart. Like, they'll stop accepting charge once they're full, but I know it will eventually drain idly, and then it will immediately charge itself back up. I don't know if that's healthy for the battery. So I probably won't get a tablet, but it's just something I've been toying with recently. And actually, the station building there is pretty much finished. I know there's some footwork to do on the lower level of it, where the actual exit queue leaves the station. You may notice, I've probably mentioned this before, but I don't know if I can't remember if I have. With my entrance and exits for roller coasters, at least where the station is elevated, which is pretty much every station I've ever built, I always try and make sure that at least one of the paths features no staircases. So in this case, it's the exit path. It's all ramps. The entrance queue has steps, but the exit queue doesn't, because I want it to be disabled, accessible to wheelchairs. So a lot of roller coasters, they have steps in the queue line, but they won't have steps in the exit queue line, or there'll be like a disabled access elevator or something like that. Obviously, those don't exist in Planet Coaster unless you build them out of scenery pieces, so I think it's just easier from a laziness point of view to just build an exit line or a queue line, one or the other, without any steps. So that's kind of what I've done there. None of you would have picked up on that. I thought it might be not worth just mentioning, just in case any of you would find that sort of thing interesting. Now here, I was trying to think of a good way of integrating this sort of overhang that the exit and entrance queues pose. I wanted to keep just the standard rectangle shape of the warehouse / factory / mine building itself. So I thought I'd have this sort of wooden overhang. And I think it actually turned out pretty well, to be honest. And then I just sort of added these structural reinforcements out of a slightly darker green. In fact, the stock color for those wooden planks there, and actually I was super happy with how this came out. I think this works a lot better than just extending that green, the green brick wall structure. I think it really it's a nice accent to this building that feels like it fits with the theme of the building itself, and just adds a little bit more shape and diversity and interesting architectural flair than we otherwise had. And you can see I built it out of those yellow fence pieces again, which I kept to their stock color. So I was very lazy with that extension, but the color scheme I think worked out really, really nicely. And there it is there. How are we doing for time? Oh, we've not got much time left. Okay, good. Oh, good, it's nearly over, said everyone in the chat. So what am I doing now? Now we're still working on this building, and I've run out of things to talk about really realistically. So what else is there to discuss? One thing that bummed me out actually was my phone is coming up to needing a renewal, and it's a Samsung Galaxy S7. I really like the Galaxy S7s. I really like the Galaxy S7 because it has a headphone jack and it has a micro SD card port, which are like the two really important things for me. And the new Note phone, which is meant to be their most feature-rich phone, does not have a headphone jack, which really annoyed me, which means that there's a very high likelihood that the new Galaxy S phone is not going to have a headphone jack either, which really sucks, because I have lots of nice headphones, and, it's all well and good for commuting, Bluetooth headphones, whatever, when you're on the London Underground or whatever, who cares? But when I'm traveling, I like having a nice pair of headphones, and all nice headphones, pretty much, that I can think of, aren't Bluetooth. They are 3.5mm jack, or bigger. So it really sucks that they've decided to get rid of that for the sake of following the trends set by the industry. Thank you, Apple, for that. Another reason why I don't really want to get an iPad, I don't want to support this kind of anti-consumer practice. I'm hoping that the backlash from the Note's headphone jack removal might make them keep the headphone jack in the S phones, or at the very least keep it as a feature in their cheaper phones. I think it's the A series, which I always found that was weird, that the cheap headphone jack is now seen as a cheap feature in cheap phones, given that, like I said earlier, all expensive headphones rely on the 3.5mm jack. It's only mid-priced headphones that are Bluetooth, so it's kind of ironic in that sense. I mean, I know the real reason for it. It's to save money and, I don't know, to look cool, I suppose, but whatever. It annoys me nonetheless. That being said, the Samsung Galaxy S7 to me is the perfect phone. I love it so much. I like having a big bezel, and I really like having a face button that's like on the front, that's the fingerprint scanner, because I have a case on my phone because I drop it so much. And I think that having a fingerprint scanner on the back would be really, really irritating. I had a Sony Xperia Z5 before I had my Samsung Galaxy S7, and that had a fingerprint sensor on the side, and it was fine, but it was annoying because sometimes, like, when I'm in traffic, I'll use my phone as a sat nav, and if like the screen turns off for whatever reason, I don't have to take my eyes off the road. I can just feel for the tactile button and just quickly whack it with my finger, and it will unlock. If it's on the side, it tends to be obscured by the clamp that holds the phone in place on the sat-nav holder. So the front-facing button is a really big deal to me as well, and that's obviously gone as well. Although I've heard that the behind-the-screen fingerprint scanners are now a thing, and they're pretty good. So that's hopefully going to be good. But that's why I kind of skipped a few generations of Samsungs. Like, I didn't get the S8 or 9. Because of the fact that they had the fingerprint scanner on the back. I think I don't really follow phones that closely. I only really follow them when my contract's about to expire after 2 years. I'll probably maybe I'll just keep the Samsung S7 and just, get a SIM-free contract. But the thing is, it's so, like, Google Maps is so slow on it now, and the battery life is so bad. I'll probably just get a new one. I don't know. Leave thoughts below about recommendations of phones as well. I don't really know what I'm doing. I tend to just subscribe to a bunch of YouTubers like Marcus Brownlee and all that, or Marcus Brown. I'll probably say his name wrong. Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. Just him, just binge watch a load of his videos and see what he recommends, and go from there. But I think that I'm happy to leave the episode there now. We're now constructing the transfer track. You can see the original car of this ride, actually. When I was saying about how wide the supports were, that was the original car, so that's why they were so wide. But yeah, we're starting to construct the transfer track, but I think we'll cut it there and finish constructing the transfer track and indeed the maintenance shed next episode. I'm going to stick an end script. Oh, actually, you can see me here, actually. Just making sure the transfer track is the right length by pausing the car at the, when it's side on to where the transfer track is. And now I've established it's okay, I think we can definitely leave it there now. On screen, on the left, is a link to the full Velocity Lake playlist, and on the right was a video chosen for you by YouTube's recommendation algorithm. Check out links in the description to stuff like my Instagram if you want to, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and subsequently enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, my dudes.